Greetings, Religion and Warfare students. So, this is going to be the last response paper that I prepare you for. So, maybe you can breathe a sigh of relief, maybe you can be sad, maybe a little bit of both, I'm not sure. But I do miss this time, will miss this time together. I do miss all of you. I do not much like doing this as a purely online class. It was much more fun to be able to discuss things with you. That being said, I thought people did a really good job on the last response, their responses on the discussion prompt on Wednesday to this question. You know, if you thought that the atomic bombs were justified, how would you explain this to the people who were injured? And if you thought the bombs were okay, or were not justified, how would you explain this to the soldiers invading Japan? And I just wanted to do that to kind of give you a sense of the emotional issues that could be wrapped up in this. I mean, I would not want to have to explain that to either one of those groups of people. But now I just need to talk about what's coming up. So the last section that you're going to be writing a response paper on is called The Cold War and the Rise of Islamism. So what that section is focusing on is, of course, the period from basically the 1950s to today and trying to connect them all together. And in some ways it is going back over some of the same time period that we went over in the last section, which was on the Holocaust and the establishment of Israel. There's going to be some parallels, right? We're going to be doing it from slightly different perspectives, but the time period is similar. So the first two videos that you'll watch, one is about the rise of Billy Graham, and the other is about some Catholic responses to the Cold War. And the idea of doing this, of course, is to show how to some Americans, actually to many Americans, the Cold War was in many ways a religious war. But also I want you to see that people responded in different ways to this, even people within the same religious tradition. So when you look at Bishop Sheen and Father Keller, they actually will respond in different ways. And Bishop Sheen is really mad in this video clip. I do want to point out that's not usually how he was. Bishop Sheen was actually generally just a pretty nice guy and very funny, but he was very angry about communism, as you'll see in that video clip. The next video clips are going to be looking at this, going to remind us a little bit about the history of the caliphate, emphasize how there is no longer a caliphate and kind of how that impacts Islam. We will next watch a couple of videos, and one thing I want to remind you of, just like last section, there's no readings for this section, it's all videos. In this next few videos, they're going to look at a person named Sayyid Qutb. The next video is about a man named Sayyid Qutb in the Muslim Brotherhood. Sayyid Qutb is a very important Islamicist thinker and is strongly connected to something called the Muslim Brotherhood, which you may have heard of, being active in Egypt. He was actually Egyptian. There is then a kind of review of the Six-Day War and how it impacted Arab nationalism. One thing I hope that people got out of the response papers, the last section, was how secular thought was very important to many Muslims at this time. And in many ways, their thinking was guided primarily by kind of secular Arab nationalism. It's important to remember there are Arab Christians. And what they tended to focus on was their shared Arab identity. And we're going to see how there's a shift for that for some Muslims. There are then there's a video about Osama bin Laden and about the influences of him as a young man. And then after that there'll be several videos about the Afghanistan, and in particular Osama bin Laden's connection there, and also the Soviet Union's invasion in Afghanistan. So I think that's very relevant to kind of understand what's going on in Afghanistan today and the connection between the United States, Osama bin Laden, and Afghanistan. There are then a couple videos looking at the war in Iraq, primarily the first war. Before that, there's actually a war on the war. There's a video, on the war between Iran and Iraq that took place from 1980 to 1988. And that war is also connected to issues of religion. And it's interesting to see how that war is going to help lead to the Gulf War, which then connects back to the American invasion, or to the attack on the Americans by Osama bin Laden, and then our invasion of Afghanistan. So there are several videos then about the Gulf War, and then Osama bin Laden's connection to it. And by this, I'm talking about the first Gulf War. And then we go back to Afghanistan to look at briefly at America's invasion of Afghanistan in the wake of the bombing in New York. And then next we look at the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria and in the Middle East in general. And we want to try to understand, why was this group able to become so powerful? Why were they so dangerous? And that's just really important, I think, to understand. One thing I like to point out to people is, you'll see when they'll say, well, how is ancient history useful? I'll be like, well, I don't know what you consider ancient history exactly, but certainly I would consider 1,300 years ago pretty old, or 1,400 years ago rather, and we can see how the Sunni-Shia split in the 7th century helped lead to conflict today in those sections. Now, one thing that I think is kind of problematic, whenever we look at religion and warfare, it tends to make religion look really, really violent. And I have some problems with that, because I would argue religion also helps to prevent violence. And not all forms of religion are going to be as connected to violence as others. For example, Quakers reject violence as illegitimate completely. So, I'm always kind of nervous about that. It's especially something we need to think about when it comes to Islam. Islam is sometimes treated as particularly violent, and there are some problems with doing that. And I hope I've made that clear in class. There's different types of Islam in different time periods, in different places. And of course, each individual Muslim may have their own take on the religion. And there's always that fear that I'm going to make, this look, basically make it seem like all Muslims are really violent. That's not my goal here. And that would, even if that was my goal, it's false. But, so I decided to end with this video on Mosul. And it's following a group of Muslim soldiers fighting ISIS, right? And they are very critical of ISIS. So I wanted to kind of give their voices a chance to speak. Now, that's a longer video. It's about 40 minutes long, and there's only 3 questions. So, it's similar to that white light black rain video, where I'm just looking for you to give me some examples that answer the questions. There's this question: how would you describe the soldiers? What sorts of experiences did they have? How did religion appear in this video? It's the kind of thing you take notes on, and then you answer at the end. But all that being said, I think that this is not necessarily an easy set of videos to watch, but I think it's really helpful to show us the roots to the current issues we face, and to help us have a deeper understanding of religion and warfare. So I hope that you will find it interesting, and I look forward to reading your response papers on that subject.